Fix this, and I'll give you $100 million. The words fell like a hammer in the middle of Titan Dynamics' glass-walled boardroom, high above the skyline of Manhattan. They came from Jonathan Steele, the billionaire CEO known as much for his empire of energy as for his arrogance. His voice was sharp, almost playful, but the sneer on his face told everyone it wasn't a joke. The Helios reactor, a machine built to power entire cities, sat silent at the heart of the room. After billions of dollars and weeks of failure, Steele had run out of patience with his engineers. He turned, scanning the room for his next victim, until his gaze locked on someone who was never supposed to be part of this story. Her name was Camille Johnson. She wasn't a scientist. She wasn't an executive. She was a black waitress, hired to carry trays of coffee and hors d'oeuvres during the endless meetings of men in suits. Her uniform was simple, but her beauty was undeniable, youthful, balanced, striking. And yet, in this room of power, her presence was invisible. Until now. You, Steele said, pointing at her like she was part of the furniture. Maybe you have the answer. Maybe you're smarter than the people I pay millions. Fix it, and I'll give you $100 million. The laughter started slowly, then rippled through the room. Engineers chuckled nervously. Executives smirked. It wasn't just about a broken machine anymore. It was about humiliation. It was about reminding a black woman exactly where she stood. Camille froze, cheeks burning, the weight of every eye pressed down on her, the shame thick as smoke. She wanted to disappear. But just as Steele's cruel smile widened, another voice rose, small but steady, cutting through the noise. My mom can't, the voice said. But I can. At the doorway stood Maya, Camille's daughter, no older than 11, clutching a worn teddy bear. Her eyes blazed with a quiet certainty that stunned the room. This is where our black story begins, not in triumph, but in scorn. And before it ends, the arrogance of a billionaire will be shattered by the courage of a child. If you're ready for this journey, stay with me. The Helios reactor was more than a machine. It was a promise that Titan Dynamics would lead the world into a future of clean, limitless energy. A promise that Jonathan Steele, the billionaire with silver hair and sharper eyes, would carve his name into history as the man who made fossil fuels obsolete. For 6 relentless weeks, the brightest engineers in America had worked in this cathedral of steel and glass. They had rewritten code, swapped out circuit boards, run simulations that burned through supercomputers night and day. Each time, the result was the same: 70 seconds. The reactor hummed, surged, and then collapsed in a whimper of failure. The cost of failure was already staggering. $5 billion had been sunk into this project. Generals and senators were waiting for results. Titan Dynamics' stock price trembled on the edge of collapse. The fate of a corporate empire, maybe even the balance of global energy, hung on a machine that refused to stay alive. Jonathan Steele's fury was legendary. In meetings, his words cut sharper than knives. But this day, his anger had turned into something colder, something crueler. He wanted to humiliate. He wanted to remind everyone who held the power in this room. That was when his gaze found Camille Johnson. She had no reason to be here other than to serve. A black waitress, hired through a catering service, carrying coffee in a room full of men who thought themselves masters of the universe. To Steele, she was the perfect target. Disposable. Powerless. An object lesson. The insult carried more weight than words alone. It dripped with centuries of history, the same disdain that had followed women like Camille through every door they had ever walked through. She was not just mocked as a worker. She was mocked as a black woman in a place where people like her were never supposed to stand. The executives smirked. The engineers looked away, ashamed but silent. Camille stood frozen, her back straight but her heart pounding. Every fiber of her wanted to scream, to walk out, to take her daughter, and never return. But she needed the paycheck. The overtime covered school books, rent, and medical bills that never stopped coming. And Steele knew it. That was why he dared her. Why he sneered the promise of $100 million like it was pocket change. This was the collision of two worlds. The world of billion-dollar power and the world of a mother fighting to survive. And in the silence that followed, the stage was set for a clash no one in that room could have imagined. Long before she found herself standing in the glare of Titan Dynamics' boardroom, Camille Johnson lived in a world far removed from billion-dollar machines and powerful men in tailored suits. Her life was measured not in stock prices or government contracts, but in shifts. Morning shifts at a diner on the Lower East Side. Evening shifts at whatever catering job she could get. Nights spent folding laundry and making sure her daughter's homework was done before bed. Camille was only 33, but years of hard work had carved lines of fatigue across her otherwise youthful face. Still, her beauty was undeniable. Smooth skin, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to pull people in whether she wanted them to or not. Men often noticed her, but few ever saw her. To most, she was simply the waitress, the server, the background. But to Maya, she was everything. Maya Johnson was 11 years old and carried the kind of quiet fire that made people look twice. She had inherited her mother's striking eyes, though hers burned brighter, always curious, always searching. She loved machines, not phones, not gadgets, not screens, machines. Things with gears, wires, and engines that breathed with sound and vibration. Her fascination came from her grandfather, Elijah Johnson, a man who had worked the railroads in Georgia. Elijah had told Maya stories about the locomotives he tended to, massive iron giants that rumbled like thunder across the South. He taught her that every machine has a language, and if you listened carefully enough, you could hear its secrets. When he died, Maya promised him she would keep listening. Their world was small, but it was held together by love and resilience. Camille shielded Maya from the worst of it, but Maya was smart enough to see. She saw the unopened envelopes on the kitchen counter. She saw her mother counting tips late at night, rubbing her temples as she tried to stretch every dollar. She knew about the hospital bills, though her mother never admitted how bad they really were. To outsiders, they were just another struggling black family trying to make ends meet in a city that swallowed people whole. But behind closed doors, theirs was a world filled with quiet courage. Camille fought every day to keep her daughter's dreams alive, and Maya, in her own way, was already preparing to fight back against a world that had written her off before she even had a chance to begin. The boardroom had gone quiet for just a moment after Jonathan Steele threw down his challenge. The words still echoed against the glass walls like a cruel joke. $100 million. Dangled in front of a woman who earned more in tips than wages, who worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. Camille felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her throat tightened as every eye in the room locked on her. Executives in suits, engineers with their tablets, even the assistants lined against the wall, every single one of them stared, waiting for her to crumble. Steele leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk cutting across his face. He wanted the show. He wanted her humiliation. Camille shook her head, her voice trembling. "Sir, I don't know anything about that machine. I just serve." Steele chuckled, the kind of laugh that was meant to wound. "Exactly, that is all you do. But maybe, just maybe, even a waitress can see something my million-dollar minds cannot. Or maybe you will prove what I already know, that you people don't belong in this room." The words hung heavy. Everyone knew what he meant. It was not just about class, it was about color. The smirk on his face made that clear. A few nervous chuckles spread around the room. Some of the younger engineers lowered their eyes, ashamed but silent. Then Steele raised his voice, theatrically loud, so the entire board could hear. "Let us make it official. If this woman, this waitress, can fix the Helios reactor, I will pay her $100 million. Right here, right now. But if she fails, if she even dares to try and fails, she and her daughter will never work in this city again." Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was absurd. It was theater. And yet, in that moment, the impossible bet became real. Camille's heart raced. She thought of Maya, waiting quietly by the door, the only piece of her life that truly mattered. She wanted to walk away. She wanted to disappear. But before she could speak, Maya's small voice carried across the room again, steady and unshaken. "My mom can't," she said, her blue-black eyes fixed on Steele. "But I can." The room erupted in laughter, cruel and cutting, as if the very idea was too ridiculous to consider. But beneath the noise, something had shifted. A line had been drawn. And for the first time, Steele's smile faltered. The laughter had not fully died down when Jonathan Steele snapped his fingers toward the control console. "Go ahead," he ordered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Give the little girl her stage. Fire it up." The chief engineer hesitated, looking torn between disbelief and professional humiliation. He glanced at Camille, who was clutching her daughter's hand, her lips pressed tight with fear. But Steele's glare left no room for protest. With a reluctant sigh, the engineer tapped a sequence of commands. The Helios reactor came alive. At first it was just a low hum, deep and steady, like the growl of a beast stirring in its cage. Then the vibration grew, shaking through the steel floor, rattling the glasses of water on the boardroom table. Lights flickered across the massive control panels, streams of data filling the monitors. The engineers leaned forward instinctively, their eyes glued to the numbers, their bodies tense, waiting for the inevitable failure. But Maya was not watching the screens. She stepped forward, her small hands pressed against the cold metal casing of the reactor. Her eyes slipped shut. The roar of the machine filled the air, but she seemed to block it out, listening instead for something deeper, something no one else in that room was listening for. To the engineers it was absurd. To Steele, it was comedy. He leaned back in his chair and muttered loud enough for the room to hear, "What is she doing?" praying to it. More laughter rippled through the boardroom. Maya ignored them. She tilted her head slightly, her brow furrowed in concentration. The vibrations under her palms shifted, subtle but sharp, like a whisper hidden beneath a scream. She had heard it before in old train engines, in the tractors her grandfather used to mend, in machines that were hurting in ways computers could not measure. Her eyes opened suddenly. "Turn it off," she commanded. The chief engineer froze, looking first at Steele, then at the girl. Steele scoffed. 10 seconds and you are already done, afraid of a little noise?" "Turn it off now," Maya repeated, her voice calm but urgent. Something in her tone made the engineer obey. He hit the shutdown command. The roar faded, the vibration subsided, and the room fell into uneasy silence. Maya pulled her hands back and looked straight at Steele. "It is sick," she said softly, "and I know where it hurts." The mockery in the room faltered. For the first time, Steele's eyes narrowed, not in amusement, but in curiosity. Jonathan Steele rose slowly from his chair, his silver hair catching the glow of the overhead lights. His smirk had returned, sharp and cruel, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes now, curiosity laced with irritation. He took a step toward the girl, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. "So that is your grand revelation," he said, his voice low but carrying through the room. "You pressed your hands against $5 billion worth of engineering and decided it is sick? What is this? Story time?" The boardroom chuckled, relieved to have Steele leading the laughter again. But Maya did not flinch. She kept her eyes locked on him, steady and unafraid. "You are not listening," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the weight of the room. "The machines you built, they scream when they are breaking. But this one does not scream. It whispers. Your sensors are too busy chasing earthquakes. I am listening for whispers." The chuckles faded. A few engineers shifted uncomfortably. Steele blinked, then narrowed his eyes. "You are telling me your ears are better than the most advanced diagnostic systems in the world?" "Yes," Maya answered, her tone calm but certain. "Because your machines are only as smart as the people who program them. And they forgot something. They forgot to listen." The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. Steele's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without fear, without hesitation, and that someone was an 11-year-old black girl, standing in a room where she was never supposed to be. Camille tried to pull her daughter back, whispering, "Maya, please, enough." But Maya gently slipped from her grasp and stepped closer to Steele. "If you want your machine to run, you need to stop laughing at the people who hear what you cannot," she said, her words slicing through the tension. From the back of the room, a new voice rang out. "She is right." All heads turned. Dr. Linda Carter, the government physicist assigned to observe Titan dynamics, stepped forward. Her expression was serious, her tone firm. "I will document her process. If this test continues, it will not be theater, it will be science." The shift was unmistakable. What began as a cruel joke had just become an experiment. Steele's smirk faltered, and for the first time, the boardroom felt the crack in his control. The Helios reactor loomed in the center of the boardroom, its steel skin polished to a mirror shine. To most in the room, it was a marvel of engineering, flawless and untouchable. To Maya, it was something else entirely. It was a wounded giant, hiding its pain where no one had thought to look. "Turn it on again," Maya said. Her voice carried a quiet authority that made even the chief engineer hesitate. He looked at Steele, waiting for permission. Steele's lips curled into a smirk, but his eyes were sharp. "Go ahead," he said. "Let us indulge her imagination." The machine roared to life once more. The hum grew into a thunderous vibration, rattling the windows, filling the air with raw, electric energy. Engineers bent over their screens, monitoring every metric, confident they already knew what would happen. But Maya was not watching numbers. She stepped closer, head tilted, listening with every fiber of her being. Then she raised her hand and pointed to the lower section of the reactor, where thick cables fed into the core. "There," she said firmly. "That is where it hurts." An uncomfortable ripple spread across the room. The chief engineer shook his head. "Impossible," he muttered. "That housing has been tested 100 times. It is sealed, triple shielded. There is nothing wrong with it." Maya turned to him. "You cannot see it because you are looking for what is obvious. But it is not obvious. It is small, smaller than your machines can measure. That is why you missed it." Dr. Linda Carter stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the section Maya had identified. "Run the acoustic feed again," she instructed, "and zoom in on that quadrant." The engineer hesitated but obeyed. Data streamed across the monitors. At first, nothing unusual appeared. The harmonic pattern looked normal. Steele crossed his arms, ready to declare the game over. But then, a faint spike appeared on the audio waveform. It was small, so small it looked like static. "There," Dr. Carter said, pointing at the screen. "Do you see it? A microsecond vibration. It is out of rhythm." Gasps echoed through the room. The anomaly was real. The laughter died. Maya looked back at Steele, her expression calm but unyielding. "It is not perfect. It is cracked, and if you keep ignoring it, it will break everything." For the first time, Steele said nothing. His empire of certainty had been pierced by the smallest of fractures. The boardroom buzzed with disbelief. The data on the screens confirmed what Maya had said, but no one wanted to admit it. For weeks, they had searched for the flaw, armed with the most advanced technology money could buy, and yet a child had pointed it out with nothing more than her ears and her hands. Jonathan Steele broke the silence first. "So," he said, his tone sharp, "you found a crack no one else could see. Fine, but pointing out a problem is not the same as fixing it. What is your grand solution, little girl?" Maya did not blink. She walked toward the console where the engineers huddled, her small figure dwarfed by towering men and massive machines. She touched the image of the reactor on the monitor, her finger pressing against the very spot she had identified. "You cannot replace this whole section," she said. "It will take too long, and if you use the same metal, the crack will come back. You need something different, softer." The room erupted in murmurs. One engineer scoffed out loud. "Softer? That is insane. The pressure inside this chamber is beyond anything copper or aluminum could handle. It would deform." Maya turned to him calmly. "Yes," she said. "That is the point. It has to deform, just enough to absorb the vibration, like a cushion, like a bandage over a wound." The engineers looked stunned. To them, everything was about strength, about making the machine harder, stronger, tougher. But Maya spoke of softness, of flexibility, of giving way just enough to stop the crack from spreading. Dr. Linda Carter leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with interest. "She is describing material dampening," she said quietly. "It is old mechanical wisdom. Before computers, mechanics used it all the time." Steele's face darkened. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss her, but something in the clarity of her voice held him back. "You are telling me," he said slowly, "that $5 billion of engineering genius has been defeated by copper?" Maya nodded. "Copper will listen where steel refuses to. Put a thin sleeve inside the housing. Tighten the bolt against it. The copper will press into the crack, hold it together, and silence the whisper before it becomes a scream. The room fell into stunned silence. For the first time, the impossible machine had an answer, and it had come from the last person anyone expected. The air in the boardroom felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Engineers scrambled to the workshop connected to the lab, machining a thin copper sleeve exactly to Maya's specifications. Every eye followed the process, some skeptical, some quietly hopeful, all aware they were about to witness something extraordinary. When the part was ready, it was installed with almost ceremonial care. The copper sleeve slid into place. The bolt tightened against it, just as Maya had instructed. The massive Helios reactor stood silent once more, its polished steel reflecting the tense faces gathered around it. Jonathan Steele stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his pride wrapped tightly around his words. "This is it," he said. "If it works, we have her to thank. If it fails, we end this circus." The chief engineer nodded, his hand hovering over the control panel. The silence in the room was total. No laughter now, no murmurs, just the weight of anticipation pressing down on everyone. "Begin the test," Steele commanded. The reactor awoke with a low rumble, the same growl that had marked the start of every failed attempt before. The lights flickered, monitors filled with cascading numbers, and the vibration built quickly, rattling the floor beneath their feet. 10 seconds. The sound was steady. 30 seconds. The hum grew deeper, powerful but controlled. 60 seconds. The engineers exchanged cautious glances. Normally, this was when the reactor began to falter. But this time, the data on their screens stayed steady, green lines holding firm. 90 seconds. The cursed threshold. Every attempt had ended here, the moment when the machine gave up, shuddering into silence. The entire room leaned forward as one. The seconds ticked by. 91, 92, 93. The hum did not break. 2 minutes. Then 3. The data streams held, flawless and smooth. By 5 minutes, the tension snapped. Engineers broke into cheers, some wiping tears from their eyes, others embracing in disbelief. The impossible had become reality. Jonathan Steele remained frozen, his hands gripping the back of his chair. His empire had just been saved, not by his billion-dollar minds, but by an 11-year-old girl who listened where they had only calculated. The Helios reactor sang with steady power, and for the first time, the room did not hear failure. It heard possibility. Maya stood quietly beside her mother, her face calm, almost serene. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "It is happy now." The cheers had barely faded when Dr. Linda Carter raised her hand, signaling for calm. Her voice, steady but edged with awe, carried across the room. "Before we celebrate too loudly, I think we should understand what just happened here. A child has done what some of the most advanced minds in the world could not. That deserves not only recognition but context." Jonathan Steele adjusted his tie, trying to gather himself. His empire had been shaken to its core, and for once, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man caught off guard. His gaze landed on Maya, and something unreadable flickered across his face. "Who taught you this?" Steele asked, his tone sharper than intended. "No one learns to hear machines like that without guidance. Where did it come from?" Maya hesitated, her eyes flicking toward her mother. Camille squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "Tell them, baby." Maya lifted her chin. "My grandpa, Elijah Hayes. He was a mechanic all his life. He used to say engines talked to him, not with words but with rhythm. He taught me to listen when I was little." A hush settled over the room. Steele blinked, as if the name had unlocked a door in his memory. Slowly, he walked toward his private cabinet at the edge of the boardroom. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a weathered photograph encased in glass. "This man," Steele said, his voice quieter now. "Was he ever in the Air Force?" Camille frowned, confused. "Yes. He served during the late 60s, worked on jets at a base in Nevada, but he did not talk much about it." Steele turned the frame around. The black and white photo showed a young crew standing beside a fighter jet. In the corner was a man with strong, steady eyes and a quiet confidence. "Elijah Hayes. My father used to tell me a story," Steele continued, his voice almost reverent. He said his life was saved during a test flight by a black mechanic who refused to give up on a failing engine. While others called it hopeless, that man found the flaw by sound alone and fixed it mid-runway. My father said he owed everything to him. He looked at Maya, then at Camille, his voice unsteady. That man was your grandfather, and he was also the man my family could never repay. The room fell silent. The connection between past and present, between Steele's family and Maya's, had been hidden for decades, and now, in this boardroom, it had finally come full circle. The Helios reactor spun down at last, humming softly like a satisfied giant. The room was filled with the quiet sound of cooling metal, but no one moved. They were still absorbing what they had just witnessed. Weeks of failure had been overturned in less than an hour, not by advanced software or million-dollar diagnostics, but by the granddaughter of a man long forgotten. Jonathan Steele stood motionless, his face pale, his composure cracking for the first time in memory. The arrogant certainty that had defined him was gone. Instead, there was something new in his eyes, something closer to humility, maybe even shame. He finally spoke, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard. "You saved it. You saved all of it. And I made a promise." He swallowed hard before continuing. $100 million. That was the deal. And my word is my bond. Gasps rippled across the room. Even for Titan Dynamics, $100 million was no casual sum, but Steele did not flinch. He turned toward Camille, who stood frozen with disbelief. "It will be transferred into a trust," he said. "For your daughter's future, for her education, for anything she chooses. She has earned it." Camille's eyes filled with tears. For years she had carried the weight of endless shifts, endless worry, endless bills. Now, in one impossible moment, that burden had been lifted. She pulled Maya close, whispering, "You did this. You changed everything." But Steele was not finished. He looked around the boardroom at his engineers, men and women who had followed him out of fear rather than respect. "This company will change," he declared, his voice gaining strength. "No more arrogance, no more dismissing voices because of who they belong to. From this day on, Titan Dynamics will value curiosity, humility, and the courage to listen." Dr. Linda Carter stepped forward, her sharp eyes studying him. "Are you serious, Mr. Steele?" Steele nodded. "I have been blind. This company almost fell because I refused to see beyond the numbers. That ends today." For the first time, applause rose in the boardroom, not polite, not fearful, but genuine. The engineers clapped, not just for Maya, but for the possibility of a future built differently. And in the center of it all stood Maya, her small hand still gripping her mother's. She had not only saved a machine, she had cracked open the pride of a billionaire and reshaped the culture of an empire. When the applause finally faded, the room settled into a silence that felt different, softer, warmer, alive with possibility. The impossible machine had been saved, but what lingered most was not the hum of the reactor. It was the quiet realization that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked voices hold the answers the world needs most. Maya stood beside her mother, calm and radiant. She did not look like a child who had just won $100 million. She looked like someone who had simply done what she knew was right, listened when others refused to. And in that, there was a lesson far greater than technology. Life, like machines, often whispers before it screams. The warning signs, stress, exhaustion, broken trust, or a dream we keep pushing aside are always there. Most of us ignore them until the damage is too great to repair. But Maya's gift was not just about engines. It was about paying attention to the small signals, the soft tremors, the subtle cracks, and having the courage to act before they become disasters. Jonathan Steele, a man who once embodied pride and indifference, had been humbled not by force, but by a child's wisdom. His transformation was proof that no matter how high you climb, listening, truly listening, will always be more powerful than control. For Camille, it was a reminder that no struggle is wasted. Every extra shift, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had led to this. She had raised a daughter not only brilliant but brave enough to stand tall in the face of ridicule. And for Maya, it was the start of something bigger than money. She had shown the world that genius is not limited by age, race, or title. It can come from anywhere, as long as someone dares to listen. So what does this mean for us? Maybe it is a call to slow down and listen not just to machines, but to people, to ourselves, to the quiet truths we often dismiss. Maybe it is a reminder that strength is not always about pushing harder. Sometimes it is about choosing softness, humility, and patience. If this black story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that greatness can rise from the most unexpected places, then carry it with you. Let it shape how you see others. Let it change the way you face your own challenges. And if you want more stories like this, stories that move you, challenge you, and remind you of what really matters, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes, the smallest whisper can spark the biggest change.